Hey everyone, I just wanted to come online and just tell you a little bit about my story. Um, I've been walking in the faith and Christian faith for about 5 to 6 years. I was raised in it since birth, basically. My mom took me to church every Sunday, every Wednesday, but it never ever really got into this thick skull. I understood the stories, you know, Old Testament, New Testament, who Jesus was, but it really never hit the heart. And I even was baptized, and even though that was a special day for me, I didn't fully grasp what the gospel meant. And it wasn't too long after that I just fell into the world system, into the way of the world, and sinning, and eventually got to high school, started doing some drinking, smoking weed, stuff like that, hanging around different crowds that probably weren't all the best for my faith walk, anyways. Um, Still love many of my friends, of course, and people I really enjoy that have been my friends even till today. But as far as my spiritual walk, it wasn't there. And you know, that life dragged me down. It never really gave me a whole bunch of joy. I had short-term happiness here and there, and made some good friends and stuff. But it really, there was something, there was something just missing. Joy, contentment. Um, as I went from high school into my 20s, I went through different relationships, and they never went well. And I had a kid out of wedlock, and that relationship didn't work out. So I ended up just kind of just floating, just doing what I could do, but I was just lost. And then I met a woman who also had a kid, and we met, and we ended up having two more kids. So between both of us, we had four. And but that relationship wasn't going well either, and I was just like lost. Years into it, I ended up it just got so bad that we were planning on a divorce. And I had a packet. I was filling out a divorce packet. I was about halfway through doing this divorce packet, and what happened was, right about that time, I got the call. My grandfather had died, my mom's side. I mentioned to you earlier that my mom took me to church every Sunday, every Wednesday. She was faithful. Well, her dad, my grandpa, was a World War II vet turned pastor. And my mom was a prodigal child, youngest of their kids that came back to the Lord. And so here I am, the prodigal child. And so when I learned about his death, I knew I was going to go to his funeral, that we were going to fly up to Minnesota to attend that. But I didn't expect what was going to happen. I went there expecting it to just be basically what I've experienced before in funerals. And my grandma had passed 2 years before that. So I figured it'd probably be about the same thing. So I went up there, and during the funeral, I went and sat in one of the seats or one of the pews in the church, and they had this screen that was displaying different pictures of his life. Um, he and my grandma sitting together or enjoying each other's company. And as these photos were rotating through, I just saw this joy on him and this glow on him. He didn't have much, but he was just so joyful. He didn't have much financially. Often he would, plant churches and be either living in someone else's house or maybe a small house that was provided to them, but I just recall their life being so joyful. And so I was watching this, and I saw this picture where my this was well into their 80s or 90s. My grandma had dementia, and she was sitting in front of a cake. She looked pale, kind of sick, but she was smiling in front of her cake, and my grandpa just was right there with her, glowing and smiling. They were smiling together for her birthday, and it just broke me. It just, my heart, you know? I just saw the love between these two, and it just did something. It changed me. I was like, I want that so bad between me and my wife. And you know how you try not to cry, but it gets worse, and you're trying to hold it in. That's what was happening to me. My heart was just taking a pounding from what I was seeing. What I was really seeing was the love of God in these two, and the love of God in their marriage. And I made the commitment that day that when I went back home, I was going to go to church, and I was going to change the way I do things. I was going to change. I was just so done with what I was doing, you know, with the way I saw life, and I was ready to change. And I went home, and that's what I did. I went to church every Sunday, you know, and I just continued in walking in faith and learning more about what God's word says, what Jesus said. And from there, you would think that the fighting would get better, but it didn't. It got worse. You know, it was just so bad, you know. I was going this direction, my wife was kind of going that direction, and now I was going a whole different direction. And it was awful. But I started applying what I learned. And I remember one Sunday there was a fight really bad before I went to church, and just yelling, and it was not a good morning. And I was so angry with her. I went to church, and during communion I walked out and I went to the bathroom. I couldn't take communion with all that anger in me. And I went into the bathroom, and my anger quickly turned to just crying. I just started crying there in this little bathroom. And I remember this guy comes in. He looks like he wants to walk right back out because, you know, I'm just a mess. I'm not really making a whole bunch of noise. I'm trying to cry quietly. I'm not really one who wants to make a scene or be the center of attention. But he stood there, and he stayed with me, and I just dropped this big old rant about how terrible my wife is. And after I got done, he just looked at me and just said, "You have to forgive her. You just have to forgive her." And I was like, okay. And then he left, and you know, a few minutes later I walked back into the main area. The singing had just finished, and I sat down, and the pastor was getting up to speak. And the first thing he said, from what I can recall, was, "All right, today we're going to really hit on and talk about forgiveness." And I was like, wow, today, of all days, that guy in the bathroom told me I must forgive her. The pastor's talking about forgiveness. I better listen. And that whole message, just God started just talking to my heart through that pastor. And I just came to a place of surrender. And I went home. And I knew that there was a chance that I'm going to be confronted with a fight when I got home. So I got home, but I had a new plan in mind. I didn't have a plan to fight back or walk away or drive away or anything like that, or I just had a plan just to surrender to God's will. And what I did was I went in, the fight started, we went to our room, started, you know, exchanging words, and by this time I just surrendered, and I just listened to what she had to say. And even though the words hurt, I just continued listening, and God gave me the ability and the peace and the patience to do that. I don't know how I did that. He just gave me peace and patience through that. And he helped me stay the course, and I just listened and listened. And when she would say something mean to me, I would just say, "Look, I forgive you for that comment. I love you." You know, I was coming, and I meant it. It was genuine. It wasn't like I was trying to, you know, get her to think one way or another. You know, I wasn't being deceptive. God was giving me helping me see how much I loved her and how much I forgave her. And as I was forgiving her, Um, there was a point where her anger turned to remorse, and she was like, "How could you forgive me?" Because she just went on this rant of how bad of a person I am with all these words, and she wasn't used to that response, and she started crying, and it was like the Lord put His hand on my shoulder and said, "Now you see, Cole. Now you see." And I saw the devil trying to just destroy our marriage. You know what I saw? I saw my sin in it. You know, it it was like it wasn't there before. I was ranting about my wife before, but in that moment I saw so clearly the the sin, my part in it. How I wasn't the husband I was supposed to be, how I wasn't the father I was supposed to be to my kids. Sure, I was there, but I wasn't really there the way I should have been. I wasn't really there for my wife the way I should have been. In fact, if I was walking with Jesus the whole time and following His instructions for me as a husband, a lot of this could have been avoided. A lot of the heartache that she felt, that I felt, that our kids endured through this whole mess. I'm guilty. I'm a sinner and I'm guilty. I am severely guilty. I ruined years of our family life because I wanted to do things my way. And I didn't want to listen to God. I didn't want to listen to Jesus. I didn't want to follow that way. But it hit home, and I remember just apologizing and hugging her, and there was like a big shift in our marriage at that point. It wasn't like all the fights went away after that. I mean, we had a lot of hurt that we worked through, but that was a shifting point in our marriage. And it's been about 5-6 years since then, and I kept walking, and she began getting closer to, seeking out God herself. And I have the privilege of saying about a year after that, I had the privilege of baptizing her. And that was amazing. And then for the last 5 years, we've just been seeking to follow God. And we're doing this, we're not doing it perfectly. We've had our ups and downs. We still have our ups and downs even to this day. But there's one big difference between today and 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I was ready to divorce. We didn't have no love for each other. There was no love there. There might have been a desire to make it work for the kids or something. Love was gone. It was out the window. Maybe we liked the idea of it, but it wasn't there. Today, she and I, we just love each other. There's no question about that. Our fights, whenever things arise and we get into issues, they don't last a week or two. They last. They don't last that long because we have God with us who corrects our path, corrects our steps, helps speak to our hearts about what's going on, and we've been through challenges, but God is faithful, and He's been with us since. And anytime we fight, what it is one of us isn't, one or both of us, usually both of us, is just not considering, is thinking about number one and not God. It's the fights are often caused by selfishness, and a lot of it, I'll admit, it's my part. I'm naturally a kind of a selfish person, but the more I want to follow God and love her as Christ loved the church, that's in Ephesians, and as we come together and walk this out the way Christ has shown us to walk it out through His Word, our life is just full of joy. And even through the fights, God gives us peace through them. Helps us see that He's going to bring us through. And we just continue getting stronger. Even through the weak moments, it's like He creates strength through those moments. And it's just such a blessing. I wouldn't trade any one of those days prior to knowing Jesus for any of the last days of these last 6 years. It's like coming home. And this is one of the major events that led me to learn more and get to know Jesus and see the truth of the gospel, see the truth of his word and the truth of who he is. There's so much more involved. This is just one thing that, one major event, major thing that pointed me toward Jesus, how his word, following his word, what it did, following him, what he's done in our lives. And here's the gospel, that Jesus is the Son of God. He is. He came down and was born of a virgin, the Virgin Mary, and he lived a sinless life. He healed many. He ended up going to the cross because the Father was willing and he was willing to go to the cross, to die a gruesome death for our sins. And then he rose the third day, proving that he had authority over death, proving he was the Son of God. And if you decide to make the decision to believe in him and to trust him, you will be saved. That's it. That's it. He's our salvation. I pray that this comes to you well. I'm sure there'll be more videos coming after this. God bless. Take care.